Welcome back to Deadly Secret Files, where we uncover the chilling crimes that shock communities, expose hidden dangers, and leave haunting questions behind. Today, we tell the tragic story of a young woman who had her entire future ahead of her. She was ambitious, kind, full of promise, and determined to make a difference in the world. But in one brutal night, her dreams were destroyed by a man driven by violence, rage, and a complete lack of humanity. This is the murder of Zara Aleena. Zara Aleena was born in 1987 and raised in East London. She grew up surrounded by a close-knit family and a circle of friends who adored her. Zara was known for her gentle nature, her intelligence, and her determination. At 35, she was studying to become a solicitor. Her goal was simple yet powerful: to use the law to stand up for people who could not stand up for themselves. Her friends described her as radiant and compassionate, the type of person who would notice if someone was struggling and quietly step in to help. For Zara, family was everything. She was especially close to her mother and grandmother, often spending evenings with them. Her life was not defined by wealth or extravagance, but by simple joys: laughter, ambition, and love. But beneath this ordinary life was a drive that set Zara apart. She wanted to make her mark on the world, not through fame, but through justice. On June 25, 2022, Zara went out with friends in Ilford, East London. It was a summer night, warm and lively, and the streets buzzed with energy. Zara enjoyed the evening, laughing and catching up before deciding to walk home in the early hours of June 26th. She lived only 10 minutes away. The route was familiar, one she had taken many times before. Like many women, she likely believed she would be safe. She had a right to believe that. But unknown to her, danger lurked nearby. Watching, waiting. Hunting Jordan McSweeney was a 29-year-old man recently released from prison. He had a long criminal record: burglary, assault, violent behavior. He was known to police as a repeat offender, a man with a pattern of aggression and little regard for human life. But his crimes went deeper than theft or violence. McSweeney was obsessed with control, domination, and the humiliation of others. Those close to him described a man who lacked empathy, who treated people, especially women, as disposable. Psychologists often describe men like McSweeney as predatory opportunists. They roam the streets, fueled by anger, searching for a target they perceive as vulnerable. The choice is rarely about the individual woman herself. It's about power. Control. Violence for its own sake. That night, McSweeney had been drinking. He was restless, prowling the streets, approaching women and testing whether they were alone. CCTV footage would later show him stalking several women before finally setting his sights on Zara. Zara began her walk home. Her steps were calm, unaware that someone was behind her. McSweeney trailed her for minutes, keeping his distance, calculating. This was not a sudden outburst of violence, it was deliberate. He was hunting. Psychologically, stalking before an attack serves two purposes for men like McSweeney. First, it builds anticipation. He feeds off the idea of control, enjoying the sense that he has chosen his victim. Second, it allows him to ensure that no one else is nearby to intervene. It's not bravery that drives predators like him, it's cowardice. They strike only when they believe they cannot be stopped. At around 2 a.m. on Cranbrook Road, McSweeney struck. He ambushed Zara, dragging her into a driveway. In those moments, her life was violently ripped away. She was beaten and sexually assaulted with shocking brutality. The injuries were catastrophic. Zara fought, but she never stood a chance against the savagery of his attack. Forensic experts would later describe the violence as excessive, fueled not just by a desire to silence Zara, but by rage. This kind of overkill often suggests deeper psychological issues: frustration, hatred, or a twisted need to assert dominance. After the assault, McSweeney left Zara bleeding and barely alive, discarded as though she were nothing. He fled the scene, leaving her to die. Minutes later, passers-by found Zara lying on the ground. Emergency services were called, and paramedics fought desperately to save her life. But the injuries were too severe. Zara Aleena was pronounced dead shortly after. News of the murder spread quickly through Ilford. Residents were horrified. How could this happen on a busy street in a community where Zara was known and loved? The sense of safety shattered overnight. For her family, the shock was unbearable. Their daughter, granddaughter, cousin, and friend had been stolen in the cruelest way possible. Detectives immediately launched a murder investigation. CCTV footage provided crucial evidence. McSweeney was seen following Zara, then fleeing the area after the attack. His identity was quickly confirmed. Within days, police raided a caravan in Ilford, where McSweeney was hiding. He was arrested, unkempt and unapologetic. Forensic tests later confirmed his DNA on Zara's body and clothing. The evidence was overwhelming. But while his capture brought relief, it also raised disturbing questions. Why was this man with his history of violence even free to walk the streets? To understand the psychology of McSweeney is to understand a man who had spiraled long before Zara crossed his path. He grew up in an unstable environment, exposed to crime from a young age. His adulthood was marked by repeated run-ins with the law: burglary, assault, vehicle theft. He was violent, unpredictable, and deeply dangerous. Yet despite this, the system repeatedly failed to contain him. He had been released from prison just 9 days before Zara's murder. Probation services were supposed to monitor him, but resources were stretched thin and his risk was underestimated. Experts later described him as a textbook example of an escalating offender. Each crime bolder than the last, each punishment insufficient to stop him. By the time he encountered Zara, he was a ticking time bomb. Psychologists argue that offenders like McSweeney are driven not only by opportunity, but by deep-seated psychological patterns. Control and power. The attack is about domination, not just violence. Impulse and rage. Years of untreated aggression explode in moments of opportunity. Lack of empathy. To him, Zara was not a person with a family, dreams, and a future. She was prey. The chilling reality is that predators often walk among us unnoticed until they strike. McSweeney wasn't unique in his psychology. He was part of a pattern. Men who see women not as equals but as targets. Ilford was shaken to its core. Women spoke out, saying they no longer felt safe walking home alone. The murder reignited national conversations about violence against women. Only a year after the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer had sparked similar outrage. Zara's case was not just a personal tragedy. It became a symbol of systemic failure. The failure to monitor dangerous offenders. The failure to protect women. The failure to take violence seriously until it was too late. Jordan McSweeney was charged with murder and sexual assault. The trial began in late 2022. Evidence against him was overwhelming: CCTV, DNA, and eyewitness accounts. His defense had little to argue. McSweeney eventually pleaded guilty. He admitted to attacking Zara, but his confession was hollow. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of the devastation he had caused. The courtroom was packed with journalists, activists, and Zara's grieving family. Each day, they listened to details of her final moments, details no family should ever have to endure. When in December 2022, the judge sentenced McSweeney to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 38 years. It was a heavy sentence, reflecting the brutality of the crime and the danger he posed. But for Zara's family, no sentence could bring her back. Her aunt described her as the joy of their lives. Her death left a void that could never be filled. But sentencing was only part of the story. Investigations revealed that probation services had failed. McSweeney had been flagged as high risk, yet no adequate supervision was in place after his release. The chief inspector of probation later admitted, Zara Aleena's murder was preventable. This revelation ignited outrage. How many more lives would be lost because of failures in monitoring violent offenders? Zara's murder was not an isolated incident. It became part of a broader national conversation about women's safety in the UK. Campaigners pointed to the chilling similarities between Zara's case and other recent murders. The pattern was clear: women targeted while simply trying to live their lives. Walking home, meeting friends, going to work. The everyday actions that should be safe were turning into deadly risks. For women across London and beyond, Zara's murder reinforced an already existing fear. The fear of walking home alone. The fear of being followed. The fear of being seen as vulnerable prey. Psychologists note that crimes like these create collective trauma. Even those who never knew Zara felt the weight of her murder. The streets felt less safe, the shadows more menacing. But from tragedy came determination. Zara's family refused to let her story fade into silence. They launched campaigns to improve women's safety and to reform probation services. They spoke openly about Zara's kindness, her dreams, and her legacy. Her story became a rallying cry, not just about one woman's murder, but about systemic change. Criminal psychologists emphasize that offenders like McSweeney don't emerge from nowhere. They are products of neglect, broken systems, and cycles of violence left unchecked. But that does not excuse their actions. Instead, it highlights the importance of intervention. Early warning signs were missed, patterns of behavior ignored, opportunities to prevent escalation wasted. For society, the lesson is clear. Ignoring violent behavior allows it to grow, and when it grows unchecked, the consequences can be fatal. Zara Aleena's murder forced the nation to confront a painful truth. Women are still not safe in public spaces. Her death sparked vigils, protests, and campaigns. Communities came together to demand action, demanding not just words, but meaningful change. Zara Aleena should have walked home safely that night. She should be here today, building her career, laughing with her family, living the life she dreamed of. But her story was cut short by a man who saw her as an object, not a person. Her legacy, however, continues. Through the voices of her family, through the outrage of a community, through the determination of a nation demanding better. This has been Deadly Secret Files, the murder of Zara Aleena. May her story never be forgotten.